Your nation, your news. One American News Network.
On to page 2 now. The U.S. military is closely following that situation in Venezuela, where opposition leader Juan Guaido is leading a military-supported effort against the embattled dictator Nicolas Maduro. Guaido is urging Venezuelans to take to the streets on Tuesday in what he called the final phase of the operation to topple the oppressive regime.
Now, I call on the civil servants, who are a fundamental component not only for the transition, but for the reconstruction of Venezuela to recover national sovereignty. Our armed forces today, courageous soldiers, courageous patriots, courageous men who follow the Constitution, have responded to our call.
In the meantime, major figures from the U.S. have come out in support of Guaido's movement. However, the government itself says it played no role in the latest escalation of events. But Reuters is reporting Eric Prince, the founder of the private security firm Blackwater, has been advocating for a plan to send 5,000 mercenaries to Venezuela to assist in regime change. Regardless, just one day prior, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo spoke about that situation in Venezuela, saying while the future is uncertain, it will undoubtedly be an improvement on the current state of the South American country.
I think we see leaders inside of Maduro's inner circle now trying to figure out what the golden ticket looks like. What does it look like if I leave? And when they start asking those questions, surely one of them will decide that there are better times ahead, not supporting that thug.
This whole situation marks a tipping point in Venezuela's conflict. Guaido maintains the military, which is largely seen as the key to power in Venezuela. He says they're on his side, ready to divorce itself from Maduro's rule. And the Venezuelan government, however, maintains that situation is under control, and the military stands behind Maduro. Joining me now, retired gunnery sergeant for the U.S. Marine Corps and senior fellow with the London Center for Policy Research, Jessie Jane Duff. Jessie, thank you very much. So what is your take on this situation in Venezuela right now? I know there's a lot of moving parts. The U.S. is keeping a close eye on it right now. Juan Guaido says the military's with him. Maduro says the military's with him. What is your take on what's going on right now in Venezuela?
Well, the military entirely is not with Guaido, which is unfortunate, but you got to remember that there's also a huge, heavy Cuban influence which is going on within the Venezuelan military. Nobody wants to see a military-run country. This is why we have a separation of powers in our own Pentagon, that there is a civilian leadership and the military follows as directed. But when you're looking at this situation, the people in Venezuela are not armed, cannot defend themselves. They have no means of being able to protect themselves if there is a military takeover. And this aggressive type of action means that there's a grave humanitarian crisis that is going on already within the government. They're threatening these people with their liberty, their freedom, which has already been taken away. They don't have food supplies. They don't have means of supporting themselves. But as long as Maduro is enforcing this with the military and his civilian servants, so to speak, who are on the payroll, then he has a very strong chance of maintaining this dictatorship. I would not say leadership. I would say dictatorship. But Guaido's fighting hard, and the people, many of them, including some of those military members, are working with him, and there is an opportunity here for this to become unstable for Maduro and Guaido maybe to prevail.
Yeah, and we're seeing very troubling images coming out of Venezuela right now, whether it be tanks going into protesters, Maduro regime-led forces opening fire on protesters. It's a really uncomfortable situation going on in Venezuela, to say the least. And right now, the U.S. says that no military intervention is on the table. They've said in the past that all options are on the table, but you can tell right now that military intervention is very much so not their go-to priority for the time being. So what other steps can the U.S. take in really to facilitate Guaido, who they support, against Nicolas Maduro?
This is very difficult because, no, we don't want to see our military forces getting involved in another conflict, of course. We already got 17 years in Afghanistan. We haven't even pulled out of that situation. But we have to remember, just 4 decades ago, all the civil unrest that was going on in South America, that was left and right, it causes so much disruption, not only to our own economic situation here in the U.S., also the humanitarian crisis with refugees coming over our own borders. So at what point does the U.S. get involved, and how? Well, we already are involved with heavy sanctions We are basically ensuring that our allies are participating in those sanctions. But here's the thing, is Maduro is turning to our enemies, because our enemies are his friends, Russia and China, and also Cuba. Those people are enabling him and keeping him stable. So I'm quite confident that Secretary Pompeo has been working very closely with the president, along with that of our State Department officials, and ensuring that we're coming up with a strategy and a plan that could basically choke off Maduro. We have to find ways of choking him and his military off, and there are possibilities on that route.
And with that being said, I think the importance of what the regime in Venezuela means, it really is very important for the United States, no matter what direction it goes in. On one hand, we're dealing with a humanitarian crisis if Maduro stays in power. It's an economic crisis, a humanitarian crisis, whatever you want to label it. Venezuela is a mess right now. And because of that, we've seen actually a large surge of migrants, not only pouring into Colombia and Brazil, but also making their way up to the United States as well. So what would a solid Venezuela, whether it be Guaido or any other just stable leader who really looks out for the well-being of the Venezuelan people, what difference would that make in South America and for the United States?
Oh, it's an enormous difference. You know, Venezuela has one of the largest oil reserves in the world. And essentially, they have taken an economy that should have been a free, loving country that could have been rich in wealth, and all people supported by this democracy has now collapsed and is under a socialist dictator who's starving his own people. How can you essentially have so many vast resources and have people starving? I mean, when you start having this impact, it's going to filter over into the other neighboring countries, and several things will be impacted by this. Other leaders who decide that they want to get on board with Maduro. You could also have now civil unrest within those countries, and this is a chaotic domino effect. It causes, China loves these types of disruptions for us in South America, and so does Russia, because they know it destabilizes the United States. Make no mistake, they're enjoying every bit of it, because it does not hurt them, it only benefits them. When the U.S. is in any type of crisis, it basically disarms our own capabilities in handling some of our other issues that we have throughout the world. But this will impact the entire world. We're talking about huge oil reserves, we're talking about humanitarian needs, and all of that will impact the entire world. This is not something that's going to be localized within their borders.
And I think it's really telling just to see where allies lie when it comes to this matter. I mean, all the Western countries basically are siding with Guaido and his movement. And meanwhile, as you said, Russia, China, and I think Iran is also coming on the side of the Maduro regime. So that really just shows you.
Of course, Iran.
Yeah, I mean, go figure, right? But it really, I mean, that's all you have to say. I mean, name those countries, and immediately you know exactly where the priorities lie regarding each individual nation. But with that being said, a lot of people say that the people in Venezuela really turned during those blackouts. As soon as they saw that the Maduro regime couldn't do the most simple tasks, such as keeping the lights on for those people. And the images and the stories coming out of Venezuela were horrific. People in hospitals going through surgery without being able to have lights. I mean, it was just a horrible experience. So with that being said, what do you think will be the turning point for Venezuela if Maduro were to be overthrown? Do you think it would start from within the country and an organic type of movement such as happened with Guaido? Or do you think it will at some point take international pressure?
I think there's already a heavy international pressure, because we all recognize the impact upon the entire world, the world economy, the world state of humanitarian issues. We can't turn our backs the other way and suggest that this is just their problem. This is an international problem, by the way. It's impacting all of us. So I think we're going to see a lot of under-the-table moves that none of us are necessarily going to be aware of. We do have operations. We do have forces, essentially, that are allies to the U.S. We do have people of influence, players within the country that can be assisted on some level. There are ways of supporting those that support a regime change, although we aren't necessarily those that want to go about the world making regime change, but this definitely impacts the United States. When you start having this type of economic impact in part of our Americas, it impacts the United States in a severe way, more so than most countries throughout the world.
And with that being said, I think a lot of our allies in the region are also on the same page as us. Brazil doesn't like the humanitarian crisis that they're seeing. Colombia doesn't see it as well.
No.
They're all in the favor of really the idea of regime change as well. So in some sense, that does alleviate the U.S. involvement, knowing that they're on the same side as us. They want to see the same goals come out of it as well. So it's going to be a really interesting development to see. But as soon as people start being killed by their own government, that's something you have to deal with.
Empower our allies. They can probably solve this themselves also. Yes.
Yes, which would be ideal, because that means no military intervention from us. And also, you see it in the Middle East, South America, no matter what it is, the regional powers are always the ones who can deal with it better. I mean, when the United States starts to get involved, that's when you see things go wrong. But Jessie Jane Duff, thank you very much for joining us tonight.